Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Today is Thursday, April 23rd. Thank you for joining us for our Ask the Expert series. As always, we have our trusty ABA therapist with us, Rebecca Zegas. Thank you again, Rebecca. I know all the families really love hearing from you, and it gives us a little comfort knowing that you're, here for us. So with that, I'm going to move it on over to you.
Sure. Thanks again. Happy to be here as always. Today we are going to talk about how we can teach skills so our children become independent. We've talked a lot over the past few weeks about different skills we can work on, different tasks we can do. But now I'm going to share the resources on how to actually teach these skills so your child can do them independently. The first thing that we need to talk about, which will come up in every talk about ABA, is the use of positive reinforcement. So just a quick definition, it's when a stimulus is delivered after the target behavior or the response, so that's the behavior that we want to see our child engage in, has occurred. So delivering positive reinforcement increases the likelihood that that behavior will occur again in the future. And again, that's what we want to see. If you reinforce your child making their bed today, that reinforcement has worked if they make their bed again tomorrow. If that behavior does not occur again in the future, then we actually didn't provide a reinforcer. And that's okay. And we'll talk about how to figure out what reinforcers should be used and how to problem solve if needed. Something that we need to make super clear is that reinforcement is not a bribe. We all function, all human beings, on the principles of reinforcement. We all go to work because we get paid for it. We might love what we do. I love what I do, but I probably wouldn't do it if I didn't get paid for it. Bribes are given before a behavior to kind of make the person promise that they'll do the behavior. So for example, I will give you, I'll give you $100 if you go and cut my lawn, but I'll give you the money first because, I really want you to do that. That's a bribe, giving something in advance. You hear a lot of this like in sports, bribing to throw games. So someone might give a player a lot of money up front with the expectation that they throw the game. That is not reinforcement. In reinforcement, the behavior has to happen first, and then the reward comes after the behavior. So I want to take a quick look at reinforcement in action from a pretty well-known show. So if you give me 1 second, I will reshare. And we will take a look at this little clip that shows some reinforcement in action.
What's this cartoon called again?
And it's not a cartoon, it's anime.
Anime. I knew a girl in high school named Anime. Anime Fletcher.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please.
So in that clip, Sheldon is giving Penny a piece of chocolate to increase the chances in the future that she will sit on their couch quietly while watching a show.
Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah, you know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall.
She got up and left because he was trying to change that behavior of talking while they were watching a show. Let's keep watching.
Okay. I know what you're doing.
Really?
Yes. You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good. Chocolate?
No, I don't want it. Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard.
Oh my gosh, she did it!
What could she possibly be talking about for so long?
You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week.
Penny's qualities, both good and bad, are what make her who she is.
You mean like that high-pitched, irritating laugh?
Yes.
You wouldn't prefer a throaty chuckle?
You're not changing how Penny laughs.
No, that would be incongruous. No, I was going to lower the whole voice to a more pleasing register.
Sorry, guys. That girl is freaky!
Come again?
Freaky.
Freaky?
Yeah, freaky.
So he's going to reinforce for lowering the volume of her voice, hoping she does it again in the future.
Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was just a silly little example to show how we use reinforcement. The reinforcer comes after the behavior we want to see, and then that behavior should occur again in the future. Let me bring you back to my slides. Okay, so something important when we are using reinforcement with our children is looking at how quickly we need to provide that reinforcement after a behavior occurs. It absolutely must be less than 60 seconds. And ideally, we want it to be less than 1 second. We want it to be relatively immediate after the behavior that we want to see. So what happens if a reinforcer is delayed more than 60 seconds after the behavior? If we're teaching a new skill, or if we are working with a very early learner, any reinforcers that are delayed more than 60 seconds likely will not be effective, and you will not see that behavior occur again in the future. As our students have stronger learning repertoires, have a more understanding of how reinforcement works, you can increase that delay. But if we're looking at new skills or a new learner, that reinforcement needs to happen relatively immediately. So how do you select reinforcers? How do you know what your child will work for and what is going to increase future behavior? And we want to make sure that we have this reinforcing item or activity before we try to teach a new skill. Because if we're trying to teach without that reinforcer, it's very unlikely that we will see that behavior occur. So there's a few ways that you can do it. You can either, as the parent or the teacher who knows the child, select a few of the things that you know that they like, offer them, and see which one they choose. That's likely what they want at that moment. Or if your child is alone in their room or in the playroom already playing with some items, or if your child has just asked you for something, that is likely something that could also be used as a reinforcer. They've asked for it or they're already playing with it, so it's something that you know that they're interested in, that they like, and that likely if you remove it, you could then use that same thing as a reinforcer to engage in a behavior that you want to see. Okay, so first step we want to talk about is reinforcement. Reinforcement is great, but reinforcement is used when we start to see the behaviors we want to see. And with our early learners, or when we are teaching a brand new skill to any learner, we need to help the child engage in that behavior or give that response that we're looking for. And the way we do that are with prompts. And what is a prompt? A prompt is defined as instructions, gestures, demonstrations, touches, or other things that we arrange or do to increase the likelihood that children will make the correct response. In much easier words, it's what we do to help the child engage in the response that we want to see. And if we're prompting the way that we should, we're going to reduce errors because we don't want our children to practice doing it the wrong way. And the goal is to always fade and eventually reduce all prompts. Prompts are for the sole purpose of teaching with the absolute goal of removing the prompt. Something is not considered independent if any prompt needs to be used in order for the child to engage in the behavior. So here is what we call the prompt hierarchy. And at the very bottom is the most intrusive, most intense prompt that we need to use to teach our children new skills. And then you'd follow that up, and at the very top are the least intrusive prompts, which are actually no prompts at all to have our children engage in activities. So these are natural cues and just independence. So now we're going to go through what each of these prompts look like. A full physical prompt involves manual guidance. The full physical prompting method involves hand-over-hand prompting to guide a child to engage in the correct response. I like to describe this as your hands and their hands are one. So if we're working on writing, let's pretend that this is the student's hands and this is the parent's hand. The student's holding the pencil, the parent's hand is directly on top, fully prompting everything that the child is doing. We are moving the child through the steps. So for example, if we're doing toothbrushing, you take your child's hand in your hand and you prompt them to reach, grab the toothbrush, put the toothpaste on, brush their teeth. So we are doing hand over hand the entire time. This will ensure that no errors are made and that your child engages in the behavior or the response exactly like you want them to. Once they've started to show some understanding of the skill we're teaching or some understanding of the response we want, you're able to fade back to a partial physical prompt. So full physical again, hand over hand. Partial physical, we're still going to use some kind of physical touch, but this is to just guide the child to the correct response. So for example, with brushing teeth, if it's time for the child to pick up the toothbrush, instead of going hand over hand, we might just touch them on their elbow and guide them towards the toothbrush. So you're still physically touching the child, but you're providing a little bit less of a prompt for them to engage in the behavior that you want to see. Then one of the next prompting strategy is modeling. And this is where the adult just demonstrates what the child should do. So I think it was 2 weeks ago, we discussed video models. So this could be a video model, or it can be in person, you doing it right next to your child. So let's go back to the toothbrushing example. If you are standing next to your child at the sink, you have your toothbrush and you are showing them step by step what they should do, and they will imitate what you are doing. Gestural prompts are nonverbal prompts that can include facial expressions, pointing, or any other nonverbal indication of what the child should do. So for example, if you're doing toothbrushing, you might point to the toothbrush so the child knows which one to get. If a child is being asked to touch a banana and they go to touch an apple instead, you might go, a gestural prompt to say, that's not it. So again, nonverbal, no physical touch, but we are gesturing towards what the right answer is. Verbal prompts. So verbal prompting is not to be confused with the verbal direction that we're giving to engage in the behavior. So let's say, for example, the direction is brush your teeth. A verbal prompt that you might give during that is, after putting the toothpaste on the toothbrush, you might say to your child, okay, what's next? So it's not the direction to engage in the activity. It's a prompt to help them through the activity. That being said, we really want to try to limit our verbal prompts to responses that are verbal in nature. So, for example, if you hold up a flashcard with the letter F and you ask what letter, that's an example of when we are looking for a verbal response. We want our child to say F. So that would be a better time to use a verbal prompt than in the toothbrushing example. We don't need the child to say anything during that procedure. We just need them to brush their teeth. So we want to make sure that we're using verbal prompts as much as we can only for verbal responses. People become very, very dependent on verbal response. On verbal prompts. And my best example of this is directions and following a GPS. So before we had GPS systems that had verbal directions, many of us learned how to read and memorize a map, or how to use all of the other visual cues around us, street signs, maybe a certain house indicated that at that house you turn left. We used so many other strategies to learn how to get to different places. Now that we have verbal prompts on our GPS, I personally am not able to get to many places that I go to quite often without the use of my GPS and that little lady in the background telling me, turn left, turn right. I'm not using all of the natural cues in the environment that I should be using. I'm waiting for her to tell me what to do next. And we don't want our children to do that. We want our children to see the natural cues in the environment, like a toothbrush and the toothpaste and the direction to brush their teeth, to engage in that activity. We don't want them to become reliant on us saying, what's next? Get the toothpaste, get the toothbrush. That is so hard to get rid of and so hard to fade out. So we really want to be careful with our verbal prompts. Visual prompts are something that we can use and are very effective to teach our students a variety of different things. These can include objects, pictures, drawings, or symbols, anything that cues the child of what is expected. And again, back to our brushing teeth example, a picture schedule. This is the one that I showed in the slides a few weeks ago. This is a visual prompt to show the child what to do. Of course, we eventually want to be able to get rid of this and to be able to tell the child, brush your teeth, and they do so with no prompts at all, but this is one step towards independence. So looking again back at this table of the hierarchy, and how do you get through this to get to independence? And the answer to that is that it's very individualized for each child. I have worked with some students where full physical prompts are very aversive to them. Or if you are working with a child that is much bigger than you, much stronger than you, you might not be able to do physical prompting. It might be difficult to get your positioning so you can actually fully physical prompt. So you start wherever you can for that child with the most intrusive, most restrictive prompt to avoid errors. And then you move through this hierarchy as is appropriate for your child and for the skill that you're teaching. So the verbal prompting, you might leave out for a lot of the skills that you're teaching. Modeling, if your child doesn't have imitation as a skill in their repertoire, then modeling might not be something you use with your child. So this is just the general idea of which are the most intrusive prompts. And then when we get to the top with independence, this is generally the path we want to take, but leaving out things that don't serve you or your child or things that they are able to do. And then finally, we need to talk about how we pair this reinforcement and the prompting strategies to help your child become independent. So if your child has never displayed the skill independently, you must reinforce prompted responses first. This is learning. So think about when babies start to talk. If you want your baby to say mama, you don't hear them say and ignore them. As soon as you hear any sound, you provide reinforcement. You cheer, you get happy, it's exciting. Then when you hear that they can say ma, then you don't get so excited with just the You hold out for the ma to give the reinforcement and the excitement. And then you get the mama. That is the natural stage of learning. We start with the little steps, the most prompted, reinforce even for accepting your prompts, and then fading back your adult prompts and holding our reinforcement back until they engage in the behavior with the least prompt possible. So for example, if you were using full hand over hand prompting for handwriting, and then you were able to just gesture to the paper, if the child is refusing to write and needs hand over hand prompting again, we're not going to reinforce that because they've already gotten past that step. Once you've gotten past one of the levels of reinforcement for a specific skill, you want to up the ante and reinforce for the next step until we finally have gotten the child to independence as we've reinforced less and less prompting. So that's how we can put all of that together to teach so many of these skills independently. Any questions? I know that was kind of quick.
If anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat box below. I had a question, or more of an observation, really.
Sure.
With the positive reinforcement, I'm assuming that works also, like last week when we were talking about that maladaptive behavior, to get that to stop. So then what would you say would be something that, for the parents who are trying this, even-keeled, calm, and then have asked multiple times, and then the frustration kicks in and maybe the asking is not so nice anymore?
Right.
How do we get back on track then?
I would go back in and prompt. And then prompt. So we also don't want to ask and ask and ask and ask, or give a direction without prompting. Because if we're doing that, even if we know the child can do it independently, if we're going to keep giving the direction and not going to make the child engage in the behavior, we're just teaching our children to ignore us. And that's certainly not what we want. So you might have to take a couple of steps back. If your child is being very non-compliant or is just in a place of not wanting to do what we're asking, you might need to prompt and reinforce that prompted response and then quickly go back through that hierarchy if you can. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else, any questions or anything? You want to write them in the comments or ask them yourself? Please feel free. Where is it that you, I love that thing with the Big Bang Theory.
Yes.
Did you just happen to know that episode, or is there a place where people can, Google clips like that?
There is a place. I was actually trying to find another one. I have used that in a course that I've taught for years and years. And there are some other ones that I can try to share. The only problem is they sometimes in mainstream media use incorrect terminology. So while something says that it might be a clip about positive reinforcement, when you look at it and then knowing what positive reinforcement means, it might be something else.
I see.
So it's just something that I've used many times. But earlier today, I just Googled to see what else was out there, like examples of positive reinforcement in mainstream media or in TV. And a bunch of different examples came up.
Now, what would you say for parents who, because even myself, I didn't realize that the, bribe was the reward beforehand and the positive reinforcement was after. So what would you say to parents who have been doing the bribing and not realizing it and want to start now the positive reinforcement?
Sure. We had talked about it, I think 2 weeks ago, kind of a first then contingency. So it used to be, okay, here's a lollipop, take the lollipop and just be quiet while we're in the store. So instead you'll say, okay, we're going to walk through the store for a couple of minutes, and if you are quiet and behave for 3 minutes, then you can have the lollipop. So we're just going to shift that contingency to first do this, then you can have what you want. And we'll start with very, very short increments of time, especially if you've had more of a history of doing the bribing. You're not going to have it be a whole 45-minute activity that they have to wait for. You can just start in small increments of time until it's, okay, you get a lollipop when we leave the store if you behaved appropriately the whole time.
So would you say that it's pretty much counterproductive if you did I'm going to give you this lollipop now, be quiet for 3 minutes, and then they're not quiet and you take that away and they throw a fit? That's kind of counterproductive.
And that would be punishment because you're taking away a preferred activity or a preferred item. And we always like to err on reinforcement over punishment. And in that situation, they didn't behave. You took their lollipop away, and now we're probably throwing a fit in the middle of the grocery store.
Right.
Whereas had you done it the other way, that the expectation is this many minutes of walking nicely with mom in the grocery store gets you a lollipop, and mom's also going to keep that grocery shopping, or dad, that grocery shopping time short so you can reinforce that. The other way is punishment. And like I said, we would just rather reinforce if we can.
That's really helpful.
I'm glad. So many of these apply to typical children as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys, before we end, anybody else have any questions, comments, anything? Okay, well, Rebecca, as always, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate this, and we'll see you next week.
All right, bye, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye, guys.